and welcome to the Empowering Law Firm Leaders podcast, where we talk to experts across the legal sector to discover the mindsets, behaviours, skills, and digital tools that are needed to run a successful modern law firm. I'm Amy Bruce, host and marketing director at Osprey Approach. Today, I'm joined by someone with one of the most unusual origin stories you'll hear on this podcast. Our guest spent over a decade as a professional footballer, playing for some of the biggest clubs in English football, Arsenal, Manchester City and Southampton. But when his playing career ended, he made a move that few could have predicted. He went into law. In 2009, after a frustrating personal experience with poor legal advice when buying property abroad, our guest founded Judicare Law International, a UK-registered SRA-regulated firm specialising in legal matters with an international dimension. Today, Judicare handles cases across 15 countries spanning Europe, Asia, Africa and the Middle East, with a network of over 50 international lawyers and barristers. Today, we're joined by Neil Heaney. Welcome, Neil. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Good morning. My pleasure, Amy.
So today we'll be discussing what it really means to build a people-first law firm and how a career that began in football led Neil to create one of the UK's most distinctive international legal practices. We'll explore how his personal experience as a client shaped the way Judicare communicates with and cares for its own clients, what it takes to build a genuine trust across cultures, and the lessons from a recent Supreme Court victory. So, Neil, I'm not sure I'll be interviewing another law firm leader whose career started in professional football. So let's start with you and your background. What led you to where you are today?
Well, I was born and raised in the Northeast, and like many children growing up then and now, the dream was always to try and be a professional footballer. The rewards were slightly less when I was playing than they are, of course, today. But the journey, I suppose, in terms of football started very young. I was fortunate enough to be scouted for and signed for Arsenal when I was 13 years old. And over the years, I used to travel down to the Arsenal in half terms and summer holidays, etc. And that then led on to me signing contracts, various contracts with Arsenal over the years. So I signed a schoolboy contract, which took me from 14 to 16. And then upon leaving school, I then had what the old YTS scheme, youth training scheme. So that took me 16 to 18. So I moved away from the Northeast, moved down to London as a 16-year-old, lived in digs, as they were called at the time. So I lived with an Italian family who were fantastic, and I still see them today. And then I went through the ranks to become a professional, and then that then developed in first team football for Arsenal came after a number of years. So that was the background to football, and then I had a fairly long career in terms of football players. I was around about 10, 11 years of being a professional across different clubs and different areas of the country, which was all very exciting, as you can imagine. The journey, I suppose, into what I'm doing today was born of personal experience, really. When I finished football, I and quite a number of others, hundreds in fact, of professional sports people, along with the general public, were being encouraged to invest in overseas property as an investment rather than a second home. So it was, these companies were approaching people on the premise that you could invest an amount today, the property would take 2 or 3 years to build. There would be a certain percentage of growth every year, paper growth, of course. And then you wouldn't need to take delivery of the property. You could sell it at any point and make a profit, etc. So it was sold on this basis. And today that still is the case with a lot of these overseas property developments. So I and a number of players invested in this property development company. Unfortunately, and unbeknownst to us, it was a large-scale fraud. I think they took around about £50 million from investors, and then just disappeared. So I think at that point, for a number of reasons, Amy, financial, one of them, the amount of money that we'd invested, but also I was a little bit belligerent at the time, in that I didn't want them to get away with it, so to speak. And I know we talked previously about, justice. It's a lofty ambition, but I certainly wanted to see some, or try and hold these people to account. And I started looking around for a firm in the UK who could handle what turned out to be a criminal case in the Spanish courts, and it was very, very difficult, nigh on impossible, to find a firm at that point, 25, 30 years ago, who could handle something like that, which was incredibly frustrating. Very different to today, where you can go on and do a search on the internet and find 20 firms and their history and who the partners are, etc. It was very different then. So I took the decision to jump on a plane. I went to Spain, to the area, Marbella, where the investment was supposed to be, and started going around interviewing Spanish firms to see if they would be able to handle things. Again, that was rather frustrating. The English at that point, in terms of the Spanish lawyers, was not something that was fully fluent. So it was very difficult to find a firm. In the end, I found a firm in Tenerife who had a history of handling similar type schemes, but more timeshare based. They spoke perfect English, which was a relief. So we started that journey together on that with the group of investors that I was effectively the spokesperson on. And then through that, Amy, lots of other players and individuals started to approach me, knowing what I was doing with the Spanish case, and saying, well, Neil, we invested in Bulgaria, we invested in Dominican Republic, we invested in Cape Verde. Is there anything that you could do for us there? And so I started to realize that there wasn't any single solution in the UK. Out with the magic circle firms who have offices in all these jurisdictions, but we weren't in that ballpark in terms of being able to pay fees. So I started to again look at these cases and realize that it was a huge problem actually at that particular time. I think there were lots of UK shows as well about buying houses and renovating them and making profit, etc. And this was simply an extension of that, to do it in a foreign jurisdiction, which is much more exciting on paper. So that then became one jurisdiction, became two, two became four. And then I realized that we probably needed to set some structure up to this. So I started Judicare as an entity around about 18, 19 years ago, I think. And at that point, it was an unregulated entity. And then around 10 years ago, we decided to make the rather bold leap to become a SRA regulated firm. So that's a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of how I got from A to where we are today.
Yeah, what a whirlwind of a tour, and thank you for sharing your experience. And I mean, like many entrepreneurs and many business owners, it comes out of personal experience and personal struggle. And it was clear at the time that there was a gap in the market that led you to be able to help these people. And we'll talk a lot about in our conversation how you've built a law firm and how you go about running that in your way. But I think your journey to begin with really sets you apart for having that sort of people approach. I mean, all law firms and all law are often struggling in times of stress, but I think particularly knowing that your experience is personal shaped the way you entered law. So you're running you're running a regulated law firm now, but you're not a solicitor yourself, which I'm very intrigued to sort of pick your brains of how your experience has been. So, what has it been like building a law firm as a non-lawyer? Do you feel it's brought you maybe some unique advantages that others don't have?
Um, well, I suppose, you don't know what you don't know sometimes. So I didn't have really any preconceived ideas of what it would take to run a law firm. So I suppose I wasn't burdened or bogged down with fear or, things that could go wrong, or it was just an exciting thing to be able to do as a non-lawyer, to be able to set up a firm and the challenge that would come with that. And it has been incredibly challenging, of course. The last 10 years in particular have flown by. But it's a challenge every day. But one I think that everybody here and myself embrace it really. So uh, I think running the firm and dealing with all of the international partners is very different to probably the running of a normal firm in the UK. So it has real differences, and but as I say, I enjoy it.
Yeah, I think naivety is actually sometimes a good thing when you're looking to do something different. I mean, as you said, there wasn't really anything in the market that you were creating something new. And actually, I think naivety going into that is probably a good thing because it means you think outside the box or you go in there truly focused on the client. I guess that's the reason why you set that up because many people had experienced the same thing as you. So I guess it was driven by the need to help people.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think a lot of people talk about, the why of a business. Why do you do it? I think our why was very clear. It was that personal experience of the frustration, being on the other side of the line, so to speak, where you're looking for help and it's not there, or it's very difficult to find. So I think that journey, naivety, was it a little bit of that? Yes. Um, but I think we've learned a lot over the years, of course, as well, in terms of how we approach these cases. But clients, for me, the most important part of the company and the business is that customer journey, really. And that hasn't changed. That's still very prominent in what we do now. We approach everything every day, really. It's that customer journey.
Yeah, you mentioned that the journey hasn't been easy and that, like any business owner, you face challenges. Do you think there's anything where, because of your non-lawyer background, you perhaps have had to work harder in some circumstances? Is there any sort of challenges or blockers that have come your way?
Um, Not really. I suppose coming from a background that I had in terms of pressures or perceived pressure. Um, Again, you don't know what you don't know. As a player, I've played at Wembley in front of 80,000 people. So pressure is something I think that I can handle. And dealing with these cases and with clients who are under pressure themselves and stressful, it's challenging. Um, Whether or not that gives me any advantage because I'm a non-lawyer, I'm not entirely sure. I suppose if I had to put my finger on one point that would say potentially is an advantage is the ability to make quick decisions. So we don't need to, you know, sit down and analyze absolutely everything. I think we can be quite agile and we can make quick decisions. So I think not having that strict legal background has allowed us to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think that's probably I think many non-lawyers, law firm owners would probably agree because I think in your traditional route to become a lawyer, therefore to become a partner and owner, it's drilled into you to sit down and analyze and research. That probably is a an unrecognized benefit of going into that is you can have that agile, entrepreneurial, quick decision making. That's quite interesting. Um, when we first met, we were introduced by our fellow friend Simon McCrum. Shout out
Yes.
to him. Previous episode, podcast episode guest twice, in fact. So go tune into him. But when we first met, we spoke about your story, and I immediately felt like you approached running your firm with a people first approach, with that really in mind. The stories you shared of building relationships with your network around the world and the empathy that you showed towards your clients was fascinating. We spoke about that personally together. How do you define a human-centered approach in the way that you run your firm? And I guess it's interesting, I picked up on that, but do you do that purposefully? That you go into your practice thinking about the people first? Is that a conscious decision?
I think so, yes. I suppose it's a bit of a cliche, but I think that we always try and put ourselves in the position of the client. And what I mean by that is, you know, the perception or the reality of that could be me on the other end of the line. That could be a family member who's in trouble. So having that approach and that empathy towards clients, I think is extremely important because I think that first call, of course, you can't solve the problem in the first call, but I think what you can do is have an empathetic approach to it and give the client the impression that actually you're listening to them. The feedback which is we get across the review platforms, it's always positive in terms of they really listen. They really listened and understood what my issues were. And that's really important for me and for everybody that we could be that person on the other end of the line. I think that very first call is so important. Um, you only get one chance, I suppose, to make a first impression. So make sure it's a good one. And make sure that the client doesn't feel that they're talking to someone who's immediately started a clock. And I think once you have that type of approach and that willingness to listen and give some time without the clock running, I think that's when the clients are at their most vulnerable in that first call. They're at the most wary. So I think if you can put them at ease and give them the impression that, you know, they've found maybe a safe pair of hands, that's really important for me. And it's certainly the one of the guiding pillars that we try to have here is to have that empathetic approach. Does it happen all 100% of the time? No, but I think we are quite inward looking as well as a company, and if it does fall below that in any way, we do try and make sure that doesn't happen too many times, because as I say, that first interaction with a client is so important, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's that first impression. As an upcoming guest on the podcast, actually, has recently released some research about how law firms perform in that first interaction, and they've done some research about do they get back in time? How's the follow-up? How do the clients and consumers feel? And it is a big part of the process that often falls down. I mean, lawyers are they're diligent in their cases and their client service, but often once the matter has begun, but that initial follow-up, that initial inquiry, that initial discussion sometimes falls by the wayside. So I'm assuming that's part of your strategy that and your processes behind that really gear you up to that first initial comms.
Yeah, and I think because we've been doing it here and the people in the team have been doing it here for over 25 to 30 years, if a client calls a normal high street law firm with an issue in Spain or in Portugal or in Italy, that first call is going to be, it's not going to be very informed, I wouldn't imagine. but we can immediately identify what these clients are going through or the experiences that they're going through because we've seen it hundreds, if not thousands of times before. So we can build that rapport with the client fairly swiftly. They may start talking about a development. We can actually even then introduce it. They go, oh, so you're talking about this particular developer? And they're like, well, yes, how did you know that? Well, we've dealt with that in the past. Or are you talking about a particular law firm in a different jurisdiction who you've got an issue with? Well, yes, because we've encountered that before. So again, that rapport is immediate, which perhaps calling a firm that doesn't specialize in this type of thing or doesn't have that backstory of knowing what these clients are into, so to speak. It's certainly a bonus for us in terms of how we start to build that relationship. And then the follow-up is, of course, part of the job. That first call is great, but if you don't do anything about it and the client doesn't feel like you've done anything about it, then it's just been a waste of time, really. So follow-up is just as important as those initial calls.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the benefit of being truly niche, isn't it? About sticking to your guns of who you know and what you know, because it just creates that you immediately know you're an expert in your field. I know many law firms out there are looking to grow and expand and change. I'm assuming your thoughts and strategy moving forward isn't to expand your sort of practice areas. I'm guessing you're tunnel visioned on this is what we do well, and we're going to continue to do it at the best of our ability.
Yeah, I think sometimes staying in your lane is not a bad thing.
Mm,
And you can be focused on trying to expand everything. But I think in terms of us, we made a quite a unique decision, I think, when we were setting the firm up, in that we weren't going to do any UK law.
mhm,
And one of the reasons for that were that we didn't want to be seen as a competitor to UK law firms
mhm,
who may have clients, they may have their own issues with clients who've got problems with international disputes that they don't have any capability to handle. So we didn't want to be a competitor to them. We wanted them to be able to refer clients to us without the fear of us stealing them. So I think that was a quite a bold decision that we made. And actually, the work that we've received and continue to receive from UK law firms is growing as our visibility gets bigger, and recent successful high profile cases are building that for us as well. But I think staying in your lane sometimes and being an expert in that field is better than trying to be everything to every person. So I think we've made that decision, and I think it was a good one.
yeah, it's definitely paying off. Going back to that idea of communication and client care, I think if you asked 10 law firm leaders, what does effective client comms mean? I'm sure you'd get several answers and variations of the rules. How do you think about communication as a client care tool when running your firm? And what's your advice to other leaders who perhaps want to look to change that and they want to look to change how their team communicates with their clients? How do you approach that in Judicare?
Well, I go back to the communication. I think for me, it's the most important thing in terms of uh, how you lead with the team and how the clients feel about the company. Um, so in terms of that, I suppose legal skills and experience in the work that we do is pretty much a bit of a given, I think. But in terms of how you can lead the team. I think if you try and create an environment where they believe that you've got their back, your team, and the client feels that you've got their back also. And if you can develop and effectively create that environment where everybody feels like you're all in this together, I think that's a really powerful statement. And the clients certainly, again, on the feedback that we've had is that, they've felt we've stood shoulder to shoulder with them. It's a phrase I've used before, but it certainly is, because most of our cases, Amy, they don't last 2 weeks. They might last 5 years, they might last 10, they might last 15 years. So if there's no trust or confidence or empathy in that relationship, then it just doesn't survive for 10 years. So I say it's a long-term approach that we take to dealing with clients. It's not just about the billable hours. I think law firms should exist for more than that.
Yeah, I agree too, and that there's a lot of stamina that has to be involved and a lot of passion that has to be involved in taking a case 10 years into the future. And I suppose you have to think about your relationships with your teams, your employees, your network in the same way. You're all in this for the long haul. So I guess you need to approach both your employee strategy and comms in the same way you do with your clients, with that continued care, and you're all in this together. One thing that really stands out to me and fascinates me in your journey is how you work with clients and your network from a wide range of cultural backgrounds. I can imagine building that initial network was both fun and super scary, being out there to build that. And I'm sure it was a formative part of building the firm. Can you talk us through how that experience was? I mean, you also mentioned your referral network with UK firms. How have you built that trust with different cultures, different countries, and different firms?
I think it stems from experience in that, again, going back to that conversation, if we get an inquiry from a UK law firm, even though the inquiry to them may look like something that's quite scary, we can very quickly identify it. And again, we may even know the parties involved. So we can quite quickly give initial solutions or initial guidance, or even just signposting them if it's not something that we can handle. Then we can just signpost them somewhere else if it's a jurisdiction we don't cover. I had a recent inquiry a couple of days ago from a UK firm to ask if we could handle a client who had some issues in Afghanistan. Um, I said, we're niche, but we're not that niche. So it wasn't something that we could assist, but I gave them some guidance on perhaps where they could look to find something in Afghanistan, which wasn't particularly easy, as you can imagine. But in terms of, I know we talked about it before, Amy, in previous calls about cultures and that dealing with the managing partner of a firm in Portugal or in Italy is very different to dealing with the managing partner of a firm, let's say in the Middle East or in Morocco. And I think I gave you a bit of an example of what that looks like in practice. So quite a number of years ago, we had some criminal cases which were in Morocco, and the jurisdiction to try them was going to be in Morocco. So we had a loose relationship with a firm in Morocco, but on the lead up to taking instructions and filing those claims, I thought it was beneficial for me to go and meet the managing partner. So I flew to Morocco. Well, I'd had some exchanges with the managing partner in the lead up to traveling. And once I arrived in Morocco, which is very different to arriving at Heathrow, um, I was very pleased and quite welcome, surprised that he actually picked me up from the airport himself, the managing partner of the firm. And we didn't go straight to the office. He actually took me to his house, which was near Casablanca. where their offices are. And he introduced me to his wife and his children. And we sat and we had lunch for about an hour. We talked for about an hour, 2 hours about his family, his upbringing, my family, my background. He was very interested in the football story. He was the president of one of the biggest clubs in Morocco, so there was that bond straight away. So we talked for a couple of hours. He then drove to the offices. He introduced me to all of his team. We talked a little bit about the team, etc. It was only after that we sat down and we started to talk about the cases in any depth. And I think from a cultural standpoint, I learned a lot about that in terms of how you have to be alive to their cultures and how they proceed with things. And I think he was probably feeling me out a little bit as much as I was feeling him out, I suppose. Um, but that taught me a lot about letting them lead and not being overbearing or not being too pushy or aggressive in conversations, just to let them talk really. Um, because obviously, when you're in their offices, you're a guest, really. So I think from a cultural and a religious aspect, you have to be alive to that as well. And that those first encounters 10, 15 years ago were very important and influential to me in how I then dealt with and how I still deal with all of the lawyers and advocates that we deal with everywhere across the globe. And that's not to say that my relationship with a firm in Dubai or in Cyprus or in Italy isn't the same. I have some fantastic relationships with these firms, and I think without that, I think it goes beyond us sending them a little piece of work here and there. Um, I think they have to feel that they're part of something, uh, and we certainly have that relationship. And I think it might come as a surprise to a lot of people that most of these lawyers and the law firms that we deal with in these jurisdictions, when we tell them the problems that clients have encountered in their country, believe it or not, they're extremely angry if they've been mistreated by anyone, particularly if it's been another lawyer. I think they tend to feel it quite personally that someone's had a real bad experience in their country, and actually they're extremely alive to want to put that right, which is fantastic for us.
Yeah, absolutely. What a fascinating way to start your business, to go with curiosity. I think when you're dealing with a people business, the law firms is all about service and people, and you have to be curious to that. You have to be willing to ask questions and find out about people, and that must have been so fascinating to go on that journey and to continue to. I think like any business conversation or communication, you have to understand what's valuable to the person you're speaking to, whether that be your client, what is it that they care about? Perhaps in your scenario, the development, it's about understanding why did they want to take that in the first place? What were their future plans with that? That definitely, I'm assuming, impacts how they're behaving or feeling about that now. And I guess it's the same with all the people you're building up in your network within these cultures. It's about understanding what makes them tick, what's valuable to them, because only then can you build that trust and build that relationship with one another.
Yeah, I think so. And I think two of the main driving issues with these firms, I think with anyone really, is loyalty
Mm.
and respect. And I think, if you respect others, obviously they will respect you. And I think in terms of that cultural aspect, being respectful of that uh, and letting them lead is important. And I think what naturally flows from that, I think from respect is loyalty. And we're giving them pre-packed cases. They're not having to do any marketing for it. We're doing all of the hard yards, so to speak, and we're giving them nice packaged cases. But still, That loyalty to what we're doing as a firm, they all buy into that, which is incredibly important because for us that they are an extension of Judicare, and the client will see them as an extension of us. They won't see them as a separate firm operating in another jurisdiction. They'll see them as Judicare. So in selecting firms, it's really important that they do buy into that and they understand why we started the firm, what we do, why we continue to do it, and that whole empathetic approach to it, which again is extremely important. I think when we are selecting new firms in jurisdictions that we're not presently operating in, there's a period of due diligence and making sure that they are who they say they are and they've got all the relevant regulatory certificates, etc., and they're registered with their own bars. But then what goes past that is can I build and can we build a relationship with them, a long-term relationship? It's not about one case here and there. It's about being able to pick the telephone up to the managing partner of a firm in Morocco and have a quick conversation with him about an inquiry, and for him to be able to give that time, which again, it's a long and it's a constant journey that with these people. But I do think that we've got it right today in terms of who we partner with, and hopefully I think they feel the same.
Yeah, a previous guest of ours, Robert, he wrote a book about referrals and referral networks. That's a big part of how law firms get cases and grow their business anyway. So his book was really insightful about how to really nurture those. But I guess when you're operating majoritively in other countries with other referrals and other networks, I guess there must be a risk in choosing that. Like you said, your client sees them as an extension of you. So I guess there's an element of risk involved in choosing those right people.
Yeah, of course. And I think all we can do is to try and mitigate that risk down to very, very low percentages. Because obviously we're not operating in those jurisdictions. We don't know the laws and the regulations inside out as we do in the UK. But I think that due diligence process, and as I go back to when I played football, I was always within a team environment. Football's not an individual sport like tennis, obviously, or golf. You have to be able to survive within a team. And being inside a team, you very quickly can identify, I think, gut reaction almost. You know, who are the team players and who's in it for different reasons. And I think in terms of selecting those firms, that's why I will always go to the jurisdiction. I'll always go to their offices. I'll always go and have dinner with them, and I'll do all of that back work before we take the jump to instruct them on anything. So I think that's why it can take so long because, as I mentioned earlier, the legal work and the experience of being able to do the work, that's almost a given. What has to sit by the side of that is, can I build a long-term strategic relationship with these people? And do they see us as just a referral network, or do they see us as something that they want to be part of? And um, I think over the years, it's certainly been the latter.
I think your background in sport and especially team sport is definitely a superpower for you in the legal sector, in not only that gut instinct in who you hire and work with, but also that mentality in coming into the sector. I think probably many people listening will agree it can be quite a siloed industry. A lot of people go into the sector having worked themselves on themselves with themselves through an
Yeah.
academic route and then get made partner, and it's still all very, a siloed experience. So I think that is probably also a secret superpower to you in running a successful firm.
Yeah, and I think I've learned to be comfortable being uncomfortable, so
Mm.
to speak. And even talking to lawyers and going seeing law firms in the UK, um, I think I quite welcome that. I actually look forward to it now. It doesn't faze me. Whereas 10, 15 years ago, going to see a law firm in the UK or in central London was quite a daunting thing. But actually, it's not actually that in practice.
It grows on you.
It does.
You mentioned briefly about your success recently in the Supreme Court, so let's talk about that a little bit.
Yes,
Firstly, congratulations. You
thank
also
you.
told me when you started the call that you've just won your second case in the Supreme Court. So let's combine them together in the discussion about how you go about taking those cases for 10 years, 15 years, and finally having that win. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey and what it's taught you along the way?
Yeah, it's a bit London bus syndrome. You wait 15 years for one decision and two come along very quickly at the same time. Yeah, in terms of that, very similar to my experience. These clients, we first met the two cases that you referenced there. We met those clients maybe 15, 16 years ago. We originally took their cases on to go against their developer in Spain. These two cases were in Spanish jurisdiction. So we were fighting against developers who breached contracts, hadn't delivered properties, and the view was to effectively get them to return the money that the clients had paid. In most instances, back then, the deposits were significant, almost life savings for people. So that journey started by taking the developers to court. Unfortunately, a vast majority of those developers, whilst the litigation was running, had filed for bankruptcy. So actually recovering the money through that route became impossible. But through Spanish legislation at the time, we were able to, when it was clear that we weren't going to get any redress legally against the developers, we had a second bite of the cherry, so to speak, and we could then turn our guns, so to speak, on the receiving banks in Spain, who also had a legal obligation to protect those deposits that those clients were paying into the bank accounts of foreign and Spanish developers. So we started that process around about 10 years ago by going against the receiving banks using the legislation in Spain that afforded us or allowed us that route. And we've been successful against the banks at first instance. The banks appealed. We won that appeal. Then they appealed to the Supreme Courts. And as I say, the first two of those cases, and there are quite a number sitting effectively in a holding pattern, waiting for the outcomes of these early cases. So we trust that winning these first two cases after all of this time, that the banks will hopefully, I suppose, maybe too much to hope for, do the right thing and not fight every single claim. But it's very welcome that the Spanish courts, and particularly the Supreme Court, have come down on the side of clients and customers and not stood with the banks because there is significant money at risk here in terms of the Spanish banks and the risks to the Spanish economy, etc. But it's welcome that, and it was always a worry, of course, that there may be some form of influence that wouldn't see them going against the banks in Spain for the return of all of this money. But fortunately, they've taken the view that it was the clients who've been wronged here and not the banks. So that whole journey has been one of resilience. I think, to be honest, most of the clients had in their mind probably written the cases off, probably written the money off, hope beyond hope that they may get a favourable judgment. There's always that skepticism, of course. They've had a bad experience of Spain, and it's true of all of the clients that we meet. They've had one bad experience of a foreign jurisdiction. our experience is slightly different. So trying to give them that confidence that, listen, it's going to be a long fight, but we do think we'll get there in the end. Do most of them agree with us? Probably not. As I say, hope above hope. But fortunately, in these cases in Spain, the fight's been worth it. It's been great to inform the clients and send them the judgments. It's quite an interesting thing for us, of course, to have taken cases to the Supreme Court and been successful against Spanish banks. So we hope, as I say, the ones that are sitting in the holding pattern will have the same result shortly.
Yeah, congratulations on the efforts and the win there. Is there anything you learned about yourself, or is there anything that you've learned about clients and human behavior in that process?
Well, I think you encounter and you go through the full gamut of experiences. There's anger, there's frustration, there's joy when we get on these Spanish cases the first result in the first instance court, which we won 10 years ago. There's huge relief and excitement that they may soon recover their money, and then that very soon turns to anger and despair. And when we say that actually they've appealed, so it's going to be another 3 years, and then winning that appeal, and it's going to be another 5 years. I think they've got to have trust in what we're doing, and I think they do. And we're very keen to keep them updated, send them emails, even if nothing's happening. I think clients appreciate you picking the phone up and saying, listen, I know it's frustrating. We were hoping to have the judgment. We were informed we would have the judgment 6 months ago. It hasn't been issued yet. We are chasing it. Don't worry. So I think it's all about that client journey. And as I said, I go back to what I said before, if you can create that impression that actually you're in this with them, then I think that's it's really appreciated by most, if not all of our clients.
Going back to that empathy strategy and you're putting people first and using that experience that you have to be successful as a firm leader. I mean, I can't imagine it's easy to continue that resilience and that passion over 10 years. What's the hardest part of running a law firm like you do with that network and with those high pressure cases? How are you tested? What's the hardest part in that?
Oh, tested well everywhere and every day, I think would be the short answer. Um, yeah, I think just being consistent and being available to the
Mm.
client. So if they've read something on the internet, and we may touch on it, AI, it's very easy now to get caught up in typing a question into one of these search engines or one of these AI tools, and it taking you off down a little rabbit hole somewhere, and then the client will call us and said, "I've read this on the internet, similar situation to mine. It didn't end well." I said, "Well, listen, being on the internet in the middle of the night is not a really good place to be." So trying to keep them away a little bit from that, very difficult. But I think in terms of that, being consistent and being available to the client, obviously there's limits to that. But and especially with the teams as well, just being consistent, keeping the messaging and going that this isn't it's not going to be a short-term thing. So if you approach that and be honest with them, I think that's another thing, to be honest with people that it is going to be a fight and they've got to strap in for the fight, but we'll be there with them all the way through it. I think that gives them um, the resilience to fight on as well.
We've all been there in the middle of the night Googling our symptoms and
Haven't
Google
we?
becomes our doctor. And it never ends well. It never ends well. And I guess, yeah, the problem we have with AI technology, there's so many benefits, but one of the problems is imagining many lawyers out there are tackling misinformation and fake information and fake news and fake stories. I'm assuming you've probably seen a bit of a rise in that recently. Is that something you're coming up against?
A little. It is getting more and more, and I don't think you can have a closed mind or a closed attitude to the technology. It is moving quickly. I think for me, the worrying aspect of it is more and more our blind reliance upon what's coming out of a computer and what's coming out, as I say, in these AI tools. There's lots of examples at the moment where there's case law being quoted that doesn't exist, and people are then submitting that into court, which is a scary thing, as I say, that our over reliance and almost blind reliance now on what's coming out over and above what they're maybe being told by their lawyer or their law firm. I think it's making clients ever more jumpy and I have to say ever more argumentative. When you tell them one thing and they've said, well, Grok or Claude or ChatGPT has told me this. Well, okay, but that's you haven't put in all of the information, which is specific to you and your case. You've just asked them one very general question. So I think that's a worrying thing um, for me in terms of what we're seeing in clients' ability to suddenly become experts in Sharia law or experts in how the Moroccan criminals justice system works, you know, from their front room or their bedroom.
Yeah, leave it to the experts. That's why they contacted you
Well,
in the
I
first place.
certainly I certainly would say that, yes.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of our conversation on this podcast and with the Osprey audience is about tech and how
Yeah.
they use software and can better use software. How is technology used in your firm with your networks and the type of cases you do? What was the focus for you? Is that a key part of the strategy?
Yes, I don't think you'd have a closed mind to it. Obviously, we rely heavily on systems in the office, CRM systems, telephone systems, recording systems. Um, but that's one side of it, I think, and developments in that, and if that can assist and speed up processes, then I'm sure everyone is all for that. The customer, because a task which might take 10 hours can now take 3 or 4. Um, but I think in terms of tech, yes, I think we have to have one eye on it. We certainly do, and we're moving with that. But as I say, I think I'm a little bit reticent and yet to be convinced about the blind reliance upon it.
Yeah, that's understandable. To close our conversation, Neil, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your knowledge. But do you have one piece of advice for a current or an aspiring law firm leader after the experience you've had of setting up your firm and the successes in that journey, and especially recently? What's your advice?
Ooh, um, just go for it.
Hmm.
And if you're going to do it, be all in and don't have any. There's going to be challenges, undoubtedly, but the rewards of running your own firm and having some control and being able to make decisions that impact everything, um, it's incredibly rewarding. So if that was one thing to say to people, it would be just to go for it and embrace it, really.
I love that. What a great way to end. Go for it. Be authentically you, do it for the right reasons, get stuck in and go for it. Thank you so much, Neil, for sharing your advice and experience. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Amy.